It's me, Fee, otherwise known as White Zulu, and I have another chapter for you. This is quite an important one and has its ups and downs, so I'll get started straight away. It's called Callander, chapter 15, Our Baby's Arrival. From start to finish, everything that could go wrong did go wrong with the birth. The first thing that happened, or rather didn't happen, was I was put on a drip to begin the contractions. I was put in a side ward on my own and left alone, and waited and waited. Nothing happened. Nobody came near me, and the drip carried on for half the morning until eventually a nurse came in to check it. The bag had been empty for some time by now, so we started again, and this time she decided to put the drip on full speed to make up for lost time. Nothing happened, and was getting on for late afternoon by now. I had been in the hospital a whole day. Now this is on the 19th of May, 1972. Again, in this lonely side room with poor Fred coming and going since he'd taken the day off work to be at the birth, something which was quite a new concept in those days. I had given them the option, and he blanched at the thought of witnessing a childbirth, but bravely said yes. He was bringing me magazines and trying to keep morale up as the clocks ticked slowly by and we were abandoned by the staff. The drip was going full tilt, and the second bag was almost empty when I started to feel as though a vice had gripped my insides, and assumed that this was now the beginning of labor. I rang the bell and a nurse hurried in to do a cursory examination and said, "You're only a centimetre dilated. It'll be hours before anything happens." This is in a broad Scottish accent. I was rather dismayed at this prospect because the contractions were particularly sharp and strong. There was no talk of any form of pain management, although I had asked. "We'll give you something if we feel it's necessary," was the reply, towards the end. And so I soldiered on with these hideous contractions, and having had no prenatal care other than a few breathing exercises in the Oban cottage hospital, had no idea how to manage them other than holding my breath and gritting my teeth. To make matters worse, still trickling into my system, speeding up the contractions. Again, nobody came near me, even though Fred was really worried now and kept roaming around the ward trying to find somebody. If he did, the answer was always the same. "You're not dilated and have hours to go yet." Around 1 in the morning, now this is middle of the night, I suddenly felt the urge to push, and with nobody there to advise me, there was a terrible rip. The baby shot out and Fred fainted. Poor man. I should never have asked him to come and witness this gory affair. I simply hadn't known what I was in for. The baby's cries and my leaning on the bell finally brought someone who gasped and returned with the team. The little boy, whom we decided to call Alistair, was taken away to be washed while I was stitched up. Then taken to a ward upstairs, where he was put into a transparent bassinet, rather like a fish tank, across the room. It was a tiny room, and I was made to climb painfully onto a high, narrow hospital bed, longing to hold him in my arms, as that hadn't even happened yet. But that was against the rules. This was the national health. He wasn't going to be fed by me or even suckled, but fed by the nurses with a bottle containing a little bit of glucose water. This seemed utterly crazy to me, as I had plenty of milk. He was crying with hunger, and the only time I could handle him, or was allowed to handle him, was to change his nappy. So I sat there and sobbed, occasionally to be lectured by the nurses and told to pull myself together. It's not that my baby had been stillborn or anything like that, they scolded. The third day, I was allowed to feed him myself, and that was the most joyful experience. To this very day, I simply cannot understand the logic of keeping a mother in hospital for 10 days, but isolating her from her baby in that fashion. I suffered terribly from natal depression and spent all my days staring out of the window at the snow lying around the hospital grounds and crying. Fred brought Mum in every afternoon for visiting hours, but on her second day of coming to visit, she had bought some lovely sticky Scottish toffee and managed to pull out a huge filling from a back molar. Fred had to take more time off work to drive around trying to find a dentist during the time that I so desperately needed his company. 10 days passed very slowly. Wasn't allowed to touch my baby other than change him, and on certain hours was allowed to feed him myself. But eventually I was released and went home with my new baby. I was deliriously happy to be back in my own sanctuary and able to look after Alistair in the way I felt was best for him. He was a dear little baby, slept almost through the night from the beginning, cooed and laughed happily while I bathed and changed him. He fed well, and I never heard him cry. Fred was just as pleased to have me back at home, because now I could cook for Mum again, something he'd been doing while I was away for 10 days. She had one signature dish which she had insisted on making him the one night. It was boiled onions in white sauce, and she had made a huge dish of this, using every utensil, pot and pan in the kitchen. It took Fred hours to clean up after her, and after politely eating as much of it as he could, had to surreptitiously throw the rest away. Bar and Bob, of course, had come sweeping into the hospital the day Alistair was born, bearing gifts from the Glen Cruton staff, including a beautiful crocheted christening shawl in the softest Highland lamb's wool, and so fine that one could pull it through a wedding ring. This priceless gift was from one of the old crofters' mothers, who had known Fred since he was a little boy. I was deeply touched by some of the little silver christening mugs and other presents, which must have cost the Glen Cruton staff quite a bit, especially since they were engraved with Alistair's name and birth date. There had been another event while I was in hospital. Old Zenny had died just after arriving back from her stint in the Florida sunshine. We left Mum behind in Callander and drove up with Alistair to the funeral at Glen Cruton. Fred's 3 siblings were there as well, and I could introduce the new baby to everybody. It just so happened that I never got to meet Zenny, who was Fred's grandmother, Bar's mother, nor see her first great-grandchild, missing him by days. After seeing Mum off at Glasgow airport to join up with Dad in London, I settled into a pleasant routine, as it was now early summer, and I could take my baby out either in his little pushchair or in the car if it was inclement weather. On a sunny day, I could spend a happy morning with Ethel, strolling along the banks of the Lenny River, Alistair busy waving his little mittens around, and every now and again a local woman would stop and say, "Oh, what a bonny wee bairn he is." I wish I could do the Scottish accent. While tucking a silver coin under his baby pillow. I had to quickly confiscate these before they got into his mouth, but it was a charming custom and so enjoyable to meet such convivial women. When I was back at home on my own, doing the housework with rather long teeth, I strapped Alistair to my back, Zulu fashion, but he never seemed to stay up there and kept slipping down. I think because I didn't have the right sort of big cushiony rump as Evelina had had. Ethel introduced me to a lovely Scottish girl, slightly older than myself, who already had a little girl and had also recently had a baby boy. She and her husband owned the farm at the end of our road, and from where we got all our fresh dairy products. Like Ethel, Morag was friendly and invited me over quite frequently to have afternoon tea with her brood, often inviting others like myself, all of whom had young children, to enjoy the companionship. Weeks after Mum had left, before she and Dad were due to go back to South Africa, Bar held a christening for Alistair at Glen Cruton, inviting my parents to attend it. Fred and I drove up the night before with the baby and stayed there. Fred and I drove up the night before and stayed there along with Alistair. Bar had invited more or less all the same people who had come to our belated wedding reception and planned to hold the ceremony in the Cathedral of Trees, an area in the grounds which had been planted with trees and shrubs in the shape of a well-known cathedral, complete with gravelled aisle and nave. It was all very suitable for a christening, except that the day dawned with rain cascading out of the sky and a strong onshore westerly wind driving it. Cruton House also has a chapel and library indoors, along with central heating, and there became a tug of war between Mum wanting to have the christening done in the chapel and Ba insisting that we hold it outdoors. These two formidable women were almost circling each other, and I feared that Alistair would be an innocent party to this madness, and suggested to Mum that we make a bundle, wrap it in that exquisite woolen shawl, and let Ba have her way, and allow the poor infant to drown in the deluge. But finally, my mother-in-law saw reason, and the whole affair was moved to the chapel, much to the relief of the guests, as well as all of us. Mum had left for South Africa, and Fred and I continued our summer in the most pleasant fashion. Unfortunately, Fred had often had to work on Saturdays as well, just as he had done in Durban, and didn't see that much of our baby. He would arrive home late and tired and just sit up to eat, watch a little bit of black and white television, and then go to bed. Sundays were our only time together as a family. Of course, his parents continued to come and hound us, now on Sundays, knowing that Fred would be free to entertain them. Occasionally, we went up to Cruton ourselves, and if it was a pleasant summer's afternoon, Stella kindly offered to look after Alistair, while Fred and I took his little dinghy out onto Oban Bay and caught mackerel. We used the same methods we'd done in Baltimore in Ireland, with a square frame around which we wrapped plenty of line and 7 hooks, each decorated with a coloured feather. These we jiggled up and down and brought up lots of lovely shiny silver mackerel. I gutted these the minute we caught them, threw them into a bucket, and when that was full, we rowed back across the glassy, mirror-like surface of Oban Bay. These were halcyon days, as, when I handed the bucket to Johnny, he fried them for dinner, having dusted them with oatmeal first and turning them in a pan sizzling with butter. Arrived shockingly early in mid-July. Some very pretty red raspberries appeared on the lot of the trees, and I admired them. "Oh, those are rowan berries," explained Ethel. "They always come out at the beginning of autumn." Autumn? I could barely believe my eyes. We'd only had a couple of months of what could be called summer, and now autumn was coming. I was generally shocked. We still had some summer left, though. The days were interminably long, with the birds starting to cheep before 3 in the morning, having just gone to sleep after midnight when it finally got dark. I now understood why there were wooden shutters on both the windows in our bedroom in Callander. It was to keep the early morning light out, and allow us a little longer to sleep. If we went up to Glen Cruton, we could catch the glimpses of the aurora borealis, the northern lights, those shimmery green lights that flickered through the brief night in the very far north. A beautiful sight. There was another phenomenon which occurred in Callander during the brief summer months, and that was the piper. At weekends, a man playing the bagpipes would wander through the village and the valley of Callander, the sound of his pipes skirling to the warm summer air, in the warm summer air, which was extremely pleasant, and I enjoyed listening to them as I toiled away in our formal rose garden. Alistair would lie on a rug on the lawn nearby in the sunshine, while Fred dozed over the Sunday papers next to him. I felt I had to do something about this unruly garden, which was becoming less formal. Sorry, beg your pardon. And more jungle by the day. What I hadn't bargained for was midges, those tiny, almost invisible, biting flies that get in your eyes, up your nose, in your mouth, and even into your hair, where they bit and itched constantly. Clegs were another problem, horseflies, exactly like those which used to bite us searingly through our jeans and made our horses kick and snap while we rode through the cool forest, now attacked me whenever I was in the shade. The reason that I put my baby into the sunshine so that he would escape being bitten by both pests. As the summer seemed to gallop away from us at startling speed, we took advantage of the warm August weather to take Alistair and pack a picnic lunch and go and visit some of the lakes and the Trossachs, where we could have a swim and we could dangle his little feet in the cool water, or let him sit and splash in the shallows. Oh, I wish I had one of Chris's cough buttons. This is horrible. Still a leftover from COVID. We didn't have enough of these wonderful days, though, because of the inevitable arrival of Bar and Bob, both of whom wanted to sit and drink, the former occasionally making sorties into the garden to make extra flower beds or extend the ones we already had, all of which I had to buy seedlings and fill them up while I had a chance later, which hardly ever happened. In the meantime, I scrambled around in the kitchen making a roast with all the trimmings, when we all planned to eat with some ham and salad if we'd been on our own. Suddenly, autumn was upon us. The clocks were put back in the weather, and the weather reverted to abysmal. If it wasn't for Ethel and Morag, both providing company for me and Alistair, I think I would have gone into deep, homesick decline. I didn't see nearly enough of Fred, and although I kept up a weekly correspondence with Mum and Dad, giving them my day-to-day life in the Scottish Highlands and comparing notes with the latter about the progress of our babies, I still felt isolated and homesick. Christmas was at least our own and not held at Glen Cruton. This time we chose a little tree and decorated it rather modestly. It was Alistair's first Christmas and gave me a lot of pleasure to buy him little presents and watch him unwrap them and play happily with the paper. That's all for now. I want to thank John Moslane for helping me make these videos, and also to Sean van Vuren for uploading them and putting them onto my YouTube site. I do have a website which I encourage you to go and look at. It's www.whitezulubook.com, and it's well worth a look because it's got tons of photographs in there. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.